Good afternoon, both to all our audience here today in Vienna, but also to the participants that have joined our Tech Talk today online, also from our embassies, the warm Grüß Gott aus Wien. I would like to welcome you today to our event in the framework of the Tech Diplomacy Talks series that we conduct in the Ministry for European and International Affairs. It is one of many. We have started with topics on hydrogen, artificial intelligence, digital infrastructure and data governments, but also AI, quantum technology. Last week, you've probably seen on AWS, automatic weapon systems. Today, we will concentrate on solar geoengineering. Why do we do that? We have an aim to discuss new and emerging technologies with a disruptive and this transformative character to train and to familiarize our diplomats, but also bring the diplomatic work to the tech community and build in a double structure. We do this in Vienna, but we also have our embassies abroad, which we encourage to have the tech diplomacy talks with the community in the countries where they're stationed, to bring together the knowledge, the decision makers, the diplomats, and together foster the challenges that we face from these technologies. We also see two tendencies. The states have long abandoned their monopoly in tech development, in tech ownership. We see also private actors and commercial interests, and also the implication of private actors in international relations are something that we have to be aware of and that we have to follow. We need to understand their implications on international affairs, on the international frameworks, but also the implications that arise from these new technologies on international law, but also on human rights, on social networks, on social textures, on economic implications, and on individual rights and also freedoms. When it comes to geoengineering, solar geoengineering, what does it mean? It encompasses technologies and approaches to cool the Earth by reflecting sunlight back into space. Even if you don't understand a lot about the technical implications, and we have guests who will talk more in detail on that, one can understand that to apply these technologies can have a huge impact on the international scene. When we look into that, we also have to see the implications. How do we regulate? How do we encompass? How do we deal with these technologies in a broader context? And I would also like to point out that Austria has always had a long tradition, but also has an aim to being on the front run when it comes to dealing with these global challenges, both in technology, but also when it comes to environmental implications. We have three speakers today, and I'm very happy. I hadn't mentioned that at the beginning that we can do this talk together today with the Swiss Embassy, who shares many of our approaches when it comes to tech diplomacy and has also a long-standing tradition in using scientific approaches, technological approaches to deal in the international scene and to teach and to educate diplomats in these fields to be able to foster a better understanding on that. And I'm very glad that Salome Meyer, the Swiss ambassador to Austria, sorry, we already, is joining me today. And of course, we have here Dr. Blaž Gasparini, who is an expert on climate, and he will dive a little bit deeper into the subject from a more technical engineering, aspect. And online, I would like to welcome, I don't see him, he's here, Mr. Michel Tschirren. He is head of the Global Affairs section in the Federal Office of the Environment in the Swiss government. And he will give us a little bit an introduction on how to approach negotiations in the field of global environmental governance, and especially in the question of the solar geoengineering. As Switzerland has initiated in February this year in the framework of the United Nations Environmental Assembly, a resolution on solar radiation modification and its implication. Unfortunately, this resolution has not found the necessary support, and it would be interesting to hear why this happened and what were the arguments on both sides. I should go back a little bit to Ambassador Salome Meyer, who has been in Austria since December 2022. She had different posts in Canada, in the Bahamas, in Beijing, in South Korea, but she also has a technical edge. I understood you also founded an IT company, so technical questions are very close to her interest. And of course, as an experienced diplomat, she has been well aware of the new and emerging technologies for diplomacy and for international relations. Let me also introduce briefly Dr. Blaž Gasparini, who is currently working as a climate physicist at the University of Vienna as a Marie Curie Fellow. He worked as a postdoc scientist at the University of Washington and has a PhD in climate science from the ETH Zurich. Another connection to our partner of today's talk. His expertise is he's an expert on the impact of clouds on climate, and his primary research interests are influence of aerosols on high clouds and various ideas for artificial cooling the climate. I have already given you a small introduction of Mr. Michel Tschirren, who is, as I mentioned, an expert on international negotiations in the field of the global environmental governance. I would like to jump into the subject quickly. Maybe two technical announcements. We will record this talk, and it will be available on YouTube for you. And we hope that we will have a small discussion after the presentations, and also have time for questions from the audience, both online and in person, after our guest inputs. With that, I would like to hand over to Salome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for doing this event with us. Please explain the Swiss approach to tech diplomacy. Thank you.
Well, beauty miteinander. Thank you very much, Elisabeth, Ambassador Kornfeind, Excellencies, professors, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. First of all, thank you for this initiative, for this joint event in the frame of your tech diplomacy series, and for organizing today's exchange. I think it's a very interesting and relevant topic that we're talking about. When we talk about technological innovations, what we have often in mind is technology for sustainability, and that makes sense because sustainable development, of course, has become a major topic of diplomacy. I mean, think Paris, think SDG. So technology for sustainability and geoengineering in its widest sense is probably considered to be a technology for sustainability. That is very important. But I think the reverse is also true, namely sustainability of technology. And what do I mean by sustainability of technology? I mean that technology should not and cannot be decoupled from an analysis or an evaluation of the risks and opportunities associated with that technology. So we need to anticipate unintended consequences, and they can be positive or negative. We need to anticipate externalities of innovation. We need to particularly have a look at and anticipate potential risks and opportunities of disruptive innovation. And with this in mind, the Swiss government, the Swiss Foreign Ministry, co-founded a few years ago the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator. And this is an independent foundation with the goal of identifying pioneering breakthroughs in science, research, and technology, such as the topic that we're talking about for that matter, and then anticipate the impact of that breakthrough technology on our society. And by doing so, basically create a scientific base, a scientific reference for today's political decision makers. So the logic basically here is use the future to shape the present. And of course, that always means, particularly with new innovations and new technology, that always means cooperation and dialogue beyond disciplines, beyond stakeholder groups, and of course, beyond borders. And when I say beyond border, we all hear diplomacy, particularly multilateral diplomacy. It's indispensable, in my opinion, for global governance. You've mentioned it already, the need for frameworks, and global governance is indispensable for disruptive innovation. It is indispensable for predictability. It is indispensable for a level playing field, for access, for the prevention of abuse as well. Maybe we will be talking about this later on, and simply the prevention of negative externalities, as well as fostering the potential of positive externalities, of course. And this, in a nutshell, is basically the context within which the Swiss initiative for the resolution on solar radiation modification must be placed or understood. It's really born out of the awareness that we do have a risk of a growing gap between technologies of potentially exponential consequences on the one hand, and the institutional abilities to govern, and not necessarily govern the technology, but its deployment and its use. So the who, where, when, and how of a technology. And I think in order to avoid that gap to grow beyond reach, for that gap between the institutional framework and the exponentiality of new technology to grow out of hand, we need to address the institutional baseline as early as possible. And that is the reason why Switzerland, albeit unsuccessfully, launched this resolution, at least to get the conversation started. And obviously here, the role of diplomats is essential to the process, not just because we are used to bringing different stakeholders to the table, but also because we understand the geopolitical implications of such new technologies. And fundamentally, because anticipation is our core business. In order to anticipate, though, we need to know where to look. And so I find personally, foreign ministries are extremely well advised to invest into tech literacy of the diplomatic corps, to educate the diplomatic corps for them to be able to do this anticipatory work. And again, thank you for giving us an opportunity to develop our skills today, and I look forward to the discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Salome. And maybe we, before I hand over, I mentioned cooling the earth. Cooling the earth is well connected to what we are doing, trying to achieve in the reduction of the GHG, the greenhouse gas emissions. We're now already in the preparatory phase for the next COP. We see that there is a lot of ambition and unfortunately not always the ambition to actually reach the targets that we agree. We hope, of course, that the next COP29 is a game changer. But in all this context, we find solar geoengineering. We see the interest, but we also see the danger in explorative and exploitative possibilities, and also in maybe reduced ambition when it comes to the gas house reduction. So, having said that, please tell us what is actually happening. Thank you, Dr. Blaž.
I'll try my best in this 10-15 minutes. Let's see. So thanks a lot for organizing. I think it's great, particularly that we are collaborating here with the Swiss Embassy, because as I've mentioned, I spent some of the great years in Zurich, so I appreciate that. So I'll try to make a quick overview, a bit more focus on the scientific and technical aspects of that, but then finish up a little bit with more broader perspective. And just to make it clear, there. The computer.
Is it on?
Yeah, it's not on. Okay, sure. So there we go. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about solar geoengineering as a method to intentionally change the global energy budget and temperature. So to intentionally change the climate system, that's some sort of artificial intervention in the climate system. We're actually not talking about carbon dioxide removal, but we're talking here in general about methods which would decrease the amount of sunshine that reaches the Earth, while carbon dioxide removal is another branch of the topic of geoengineering, but it's kind of dealt differently, and these days maybe less of a taboo topic. It's much more present around, and there's maybe even some industry around it. And solar geoengineering, you could also call that solar radiation management or modification or even climate engineering. There's so many different ways to call that topic, which is probably confusing from someone who just first time heard the topic. So if I put it a little bit more into context, as a society or economy, we're emitting greenhouse gases, which of course leads to an increase in greenhouse gas concentrations, which will in turn lead to some climate change or increase in temperature, and that will finally end this vicious circle with some impacts on the society, generally rather negative. There's multiple ways how to break this vicious circle, and of course the most obvious one is to stop emitting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. But then even if we do emit some, you could think about removing part of that from the atmosphere by carbon removal. And finally, we can to some extent also adapt and increase the resilience of the society and prevent some of the bad side effects of society. But we haven't spoken so much yet about this connection between the greenhouse gas concentrations and the climate change. And this is where, there is a method to break, to some extent, this relationship, which is exactly our solar geoengineering, the topic of today. So what are we really doing here? What do we know for sure? Well, we know for sure from the climate science perspective that the more CO2 is there in the atmosphere, the higher the temperature. And that's clear from the historic data on the blue part of that plot, as well as we expect that to continue in future. It's kind of a scientifically boring linear relationship, but very clear relationship. And imagine we as a society decide, okay, we really don't want to go beyond like a pretty fine temperature target, let's say 2 degrees Celsius. Even if we maybe overshoot in terms of carbon concentrations or emissions. So in that situation, we can use this solar geoengineering methods to sort of break this relationship between the CO2 in the atmosphere and the temperature by sort of pushing us down from where we would go with some sort of a cooling method or technology which will cool the planet and generally reflect more solar radiation. So how could we do that? There's a number of proposed ideas to do that. Now, the 3 key methods are stratospheric aerosol injection, marine cloud brightening, and cirrus thinning. I'll mention in this talk just the first 2, and I start with the stratospheric aerosol method, which is the one that we are actually most certain that can cool the planet. Why are we so certain? Because of Mother Nature helps us understand that. Sometimes it happened at least 3 times in the last 70 years. We got these huge volcanic eruptions, particularly in the tropics, that put a lot of gases up, very high up in the stratosphere, between layer between 15 and 50 kilometers altitude. And that, for example, with this eruption in 91, Pinatubo led to a cooling of about 0.5 degree Celsius for about a year or two. So we understand that pretty well, that these gases will, in about a month or two, very high up in the atmosphere, transform into some reflected particles, stratospheric aerosols, which lead to less sunshine at the surface, and that leads to some climate cooling effect. And that's actually quite quick. Within a couple of months after the eruption, you start seeing the cooling effect, which maybe peaks a year after the eruption. And of course, if you think about eruption, that's just all at once. While, of course, from this natural way to modify the temperature to the idea of, some sort of artificial modification is not a big mental jump. And so people thought, well, we got a problem with warming the planet, so why wouldn't we try to mimic the volcanoes by doing that artificially? Of course, not all at once, but we'll just do that continuously and in such way sort of prevent the temperature from increase further or even cool the planet a little bit. And this is the stratospheric aerosol injection method, which I actually prefer to call it artificial volcano method, because that's really what we do. And I would point out here that this is really probably the fastest way to cool the climate. All other ways that I was even mentioning before, rather slow. We did some work on that topic from the climate modeling side. And we're actually pretty sure that this method would really cool the climate, and in such way also prevent some of the bad problems with the increasing heat wave intensity and length, but also problems related to extreme precipitation increase, as well as sea ice decrease, or we could even offset some of these expected increase in sea level. We're less certain on some other topics like the droughts. And of course, this method just tackles with the temperature and not with the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere or in the ocean. So if you have more CO2 in the ocean, then you still have a problem with ocean acidification. So if you like the coral, that's not yet a full solution to that issue. But now I also want to point out that this is not like such science fiction topic as maybe it would sound at first. There are studies estimating that for about a degree of cooling, you could get there by having 300 or so airplanes flying 3 times a day in the tropics, delivering these gases or aerosols high up at 20 kilometers altitude, and do so every time, every day continuously. And that would cost about order of magnitude 10 billion euros per year. But there is a but. So that sounds feasible and actually quite cheap compared to the decarbonization costs of the society. But then, okay, we don't really have this aircraft that would be able to do that today. And when it's about developing a new aircraft, it takes a decade or 2 of time to do that. If we decide that we want that today, and we haven't. So it'll take a while before we get there. But this is like the big hammer, sort of geoengineering, right? Or solar geoengineering. If we think about something rather smaller, but more imperfect and feasible quicker, we could also think about, a scheme where we could use existing aircrafts and just deliver this aerosols or this material at a bit lower altitudes and maybe get a 0.1 degree cooling, which is not huge, but it's non-negligible. And you could do that even, they estimated this authors within 5 years or so. That's quite quick. And probably we should think about that more. And it costs about €1 billion per year, order of magnitude. That's not big. So no cost with the development and uncertainty with the development there. But particularly where we think about this big hammer, geoengineering or solar geoengineering, everything comes at a cost. So yeah, we do have risks associated with this method. We have risks, for example, associated with the decrease in ozone layer. There's uncertainty there too, but it's quite certain that with injecting sulfur, at least like volcanoes do, we get a decrease in ozone layer that helps us prevents us the damaging impact of UV radiation. And maybe a bit less known, but we get a sky which is which looks much more milkier. So here I have these two pictures. The Swiss would know where this is taken, I guess. You see a sky with Saharan dust. So a couple of times a year we get a lot of Saharan dust in the atmosphere here over Austria, over Switzerland, and the sky with this Saharan dust looks like the sky that could look like after a stratified aerosol injection, which may decrease the potential for photovoltaics and its efficiency, which is not great since we're moving in that direction. And finally, particularly if we would do this emissions, these injections of these aerosols unevenly, maybe more in the northern hemisphere, less in the southern hemisphere, we would expect from the climate science side some shifts in the rain patterns, and maybe some Sahelian drought or something like that. So that wouldn't be great. So this was now a bit specific on the SAI. I still, I'm a cloud person. My fascination here in the climate system are clouds. I would definitely want to mention still the other method related to cloud brightening. And now go, back into space and look on the planet. We see that it's quite white, but not because of snow and ice, but because of clouds. And if it's white, it means that clouds really reflect a lot of radiation back to space and through the planet. And what we can see, if we zoom in part of that planet, sometimes we see very funny sort of tracks where the clouds are a little bit brighter. So those are not contrails. They're very high up in the atmosphere. But those are tracks behind ships, so ship tracks. So because of pollution emitted from the ships, we're actually already today inadvertently modifying those clouds because, the clouds will change their property, make more cloud droplets and reflect more radiation. And we get this sort of funny patterns that we see from the satellite. So we are doing this sort of thing already unintentionally, but then very interestingly, there's already at least one field experiment, not went too fast, where they tried to do that. Great, thank you. Where they tested that in the field. So it's not like all science fiction and totally like just lives in our computers, but they eventually really went on out of the field on the Great Coral Barrier Reef, the Australians, and they made a few field tests where they tested the technology. I mean, what they are doing is not having any climatic impact. They just really made more small-scale tests to see whether the technology works, but they really tried that method out. And for people here from the Alpine region, now, this would look kind of familiar, I would say. So those look like snow cannons, right? So similar technology being used to spray, in this case, not dirty emissions of exhaust, but seawater in the sky. And in such way, you're expected to modify clouds. Whether this works or how would that work in that specific case, I don't know. They haven't published stuff yet, so I remain cautious and skeptical. Good. So to summarize the state of science, at least for these three main topics, we have best known stratospheric aerosol geoengineering that would also have the largest cooling potential. Then we have the cloud-based marine cloud brightening, which probably can cool the planet, but it's more uncertain. And finally, actually, I'm the big expert on serious thinning, but from policy relevant perspective, it's kind of super uncertain. We're still arguing with scientists whether this would bring any cooling or not. So let's keep it for today. Happy to talk more later. So I'm interested. Finally, from the science side, today we cannot say whether to recommend or not any of these methods. The uncertainties are huge, and particularly uncertainties related to some of the topics which are very important, like agriculture. And here I have an example of the impact of SAI on different crops. And you see that first the error bars are very big, but then also one crop gets a positive impact, the other negative. So it's a mess. And we should, be more certain about that. We know probably even less about how that will affect some ecosystems. And we don't know much about regional climate change or regional rain patterns, so nothing very robust. And I mentioned already this ozone issue, which is still there. So from my side, as a scientist, I definitely here like to call for more research, more transparent research on the topic. And what we do know, however, for very sure, is that this is definitely not a plan B for climate change. I mean, we are here just targeting the symptoms of climate change and not the root cause of climate change. So no matter what you think of any reasonable future scenario, we still need to decrease those emissions and get to net zero best quicker, sooner or later. And what we definitely need to avoid here, and this is now throwing the bone to some of the diplomats present here, we definitely need to avoid this scenario in which we're still doing business as usual, carbon dioxide emissions, while maybe starting to implement geoengineering, which is at first great. We can keep the temperature constant, and some of the bad side effects of climate change, wouldn't be affected by that. But then it's like we're going in an addiction scenario. So you start with aspirin, you go with morphine, you end up with heroin. So at the end, you may see some bad side effects, and particularly if you just break that, if you stop doing that for whatever reason, then you go very quickly back to the very bad business as usual sort of trajectory with this what we call termination shock. So please think about that also from the governance perspective. So I think that brings me to my summary slide. So yes, this is a method that could potentially quickly cool the planet. Most sort of well understood process that would lead us there is the stratospheric aerosol injections. And definitely it's not a plan B for climate change. There's so many unknowns, but it's out there. It's not science fiction, and we should probably discuss that. And I think that event is really starting that. For organizing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gasparini, for this outline, but also for the summary and your conclusions on the issue. I have talked about the implications, but if you know about the implications, you first have to dispose of the uncertainties. And I think that was an element you clearly pointed out. So we have a lot of uncertainties. We also have uncertainties when it comes to the governance. I think we have found a very rudimentary indication in the Convention of Biological Diversity, which is actually a moratorium because of these uncertainties. And I would like to read it out and then hand over to our next speaker. In accordance with the precautionary approach of no climate-related geoengineering activities that may affect biodiversity should take place until there is an adequate scientific basis on which to justify such activities and appropriate consideration of the associated risks for the environment and biodiversity and associated social and economic and cultural impacts. The thing is, if we open up the discussion on how to regulate, do we not at the same time encourage exactly these field research, the models, and it entail in a circle of uncertainties again? So how do we approach the subject? What can we do on the regulatory approach? What has happened and why did we fail? And with that, I would like to hand over to Michel Tschirren. And the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for the invitation, for the introduction, for handing me the floor. It's my pleasure to be with you today and to speak, as you said, a little bit about the international negotiations on the solar radiation modification resolution at the last UN Environment Assembly. and how we prepared for it and what was the outcome. So I'll try to share my slides with you and go through my presentation in just a few seconds. You should be able to see the slides now. Excellent. So the resolution was on solar radiation modification, and Professor Blaž Gasparini just now gave a very good overview of what is covered by that. It's most important to say that it focuses on controlling the symptoms, those SRM technologies, and it does not actually reduce emissions.
Tell him to change the view. The view. He has a presenter's view on. Yeah. Maybe we can tell him.
Mr. Tschirren, could you change the view so that we have the presentation full sight?
We are seeing the presenter's view.
We see.
So, in fact, I did have the presentation view. I can try again.
But I think you can read it. I think we can continue. We can continue. We can all read it and see it. Thank you.
So what was the reason for presenting as a group of countries this draft resolution at the Environment Assembly? It is, as we have heard, a very dynamic field. So there are already international reports about the topic. There are international deliberations and decisions. You mentioned the decision of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Of course, there's also the Montreal Protocol, who has decisions on the topic. We have to underline that for these conventions, not all the member states are party to the different conventions, so that is something to keep in mind. We also know from these reports and decisions that we have information gaps. That's also something strongly highlighted by the scientific community. And there is research and testing ongoing. We've heard examples from Professor Blaž Gasparini. There's also this case known that there was, by a startup, unauthorized testing in Mexico, and the government of Mexico reacted to that. So all in all, lots is happening. However, not all member states do have good access to this information and are not well informed about what is happening in different parts of the world, despite the fact that they would be potentially affected by unintended consequences. And this probably holds true in particular for developing countries. They have very limited access. The draft resolution access to information and provide a platform for international discussion of the topic and its potential implications, risks and benefits, talk about these research and knowledge gaps, and speak what could be potential ways forward. It is certainly not the intention with this kind of resolution to weaken existing decisions or to promote the use of such technologies. And why was it presented in the context of the Environment Assembly and its environment program? That is because it is the core mandate of the UN Environment Program, UNEP, to keep the environment under review. And these technologies, of course, would have very strong intended and potentially non-intended impacts on many different ecosystems. And UNEP is well placed and acknowledged for its environmental expertise and providing each year environmental assessments. Moreover, it has the power to convene on a global level experts and member states to discuss such issues. What was our work before and during the negotiation? So there were many different types of meetings to connect with other member states, different actors, in particular academia also, and NGOs and foundations, formally and informally. For example, there was an event hybrid by the Geneva Environment Network, so that people and experts could come together and discuss various aspects which would have to be covered by a potential resolution. And then interested member states were also discussing informally in smaller groups, member states representing or originating from different UN regions. Then a draft resolution was submitted and explained formally in various committees of UNEP that contribute, among other things, to the preparation of the UN Environment Assembly. And many, of course, informal exchanges with stakeholders, particularly also science, and bilateral meetings with member states, so that finally there was a draft resolution text that was proposed by Switzerland together with other countries, so-called co-sponsors of international resolution. And very briefly, so then what was in this draft? There are two main parts. There is a preambular part that gives the context and an operative part. On this slide, you see the elements that were in this first part for the context, and it relates to my introduction. The resolution also mentioned existing important reports and decisions. And it mentioned very clearly the need for further reduction of global greenhouse gas emissions, because that is the primary goal, that is the primary objective of the international community, is what needs to happen, as SRM technologies do actually not reduce emissions. And then very clearly state also the issue of accessing relevant information. And then the operative part of the resolution mainly wanted to gather experts from different disciplines and member states to discuss the topic based on an input document prepared by the UN Environment Programme together with other actors such as the IPCC and IPBES. Those were the main elements. And of course, for that, you need member states to be able to nominate their experts. You need for member states to have focal points so they can be contacted formally by international organizations such as UNEP. We requested the UNEP ED to provide the secretariat for this process. So this could be a process well-functioning. A secretariat would invite to the meetings or the experts. And the resolution also specified in terms of the input, the basis for the discussion, which aspects it should cover. But in summary, input and the expert meetings. That was the content of the draft. How did it go? How did the discussions go at UNEA 6? So I think it's important to state that there was a lot of interest. It's a new topic. Many topics negotiated at UNEA are top resolutions that follow up previous resolutions to continue the work by UNEP and member states. For this topic, there is no prior UNEA resolution. There was a lot of interest, and there was general acknowledgement that there are information research gaps that need to be addressed. However, there were also divergent views on several points. And one such point was, who are the institutions to discuss these questions? So when the resolution requested UNEP to work with WMO and IPCC and IPBES and others. So there's a discussion who are the right institutional actors to be involved and how can and should they be brought together. And then another difficult discussion is, should this resolution consider risks and uncertainties? Because certainly that's a given, as we have also heard from the presentation. Or should it also include a discussion on potential benefits? So that was a difficult discussion. And then with regards to this information, this access to information, should such a resolution enable information to be compiled and accessed by member states and other stakeholders? Or should it go beyond that? And should the information enable a discussion potentially on governance questions? And on these points, it was interesting because some member states came in and had, in the negotiations, very strong views on one or several of these points, whereas other delegations came and they did actually not have clear positions because it is a new topic and because they did not have, prior to the UNEA, enough access to information on what is actually already happening around the world with regards to this topic. So this led to the situation that the proponents of the resolution, Switzerland and other countries, have provided a lot of rationale and explanation on why this content of the resolution and this kind of wording. There was also then several text versions, so listening to the negotiations and the views. Of course, the text proposal was adapted in order to try to bridge the views and find a space in between that would be agreeable to all, in particular to the both extreme sides with regards to potential and risks, uncertainties. Unfortunately, that was not possible. So bridging these views was not feasible during the negotiation time at the UNEA 6 Environment Assembly. So the draft resolution before the end of the negotiation was withdrawn, as already mentioned. However, of course, even with the draft being on the table, a lot of discussion was actually triggered and a lot of useful information came together at the UNEA and around. You must know that, for example, the Swiss delegation, before, during, and after this negotiation, we were contacted by experts, science, by foundations, by other member states, by several journalists or many journalists. So you could clearly see that it triggered this global debate. So we had this start of this global conversation. I would say that is very, very positive. And I would also say that in terms of outcome, it became clear through the interventions of the member states that the TED topic continues to be relevant for many member states and stakeholders, precisely also because the issue of access to information is not resolved. That would be the first step. If a governance discussion is needed, that at some point would have to take place. But certainly a governance discussion would not be possible without a sound information basis. So clearly the information would be the first step. And actually highlighting knowledge gap would also be part of this first step of information. And so this remains valid. In the meantime, we also know that the work of some actors in terms of research and small-scale testing and having strategic plans is continuing without member states really knowing, having the full picture. So I would say that gives, in a nutshell, sort of the approach that Switzerland has had and how things went. And of course, I'm very happy to hear views or questions if you so wish. So thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Tschirren, for this comprehensive overview on the endeavors of the Swiss delegation, but also on the dynamics that you obviously faced during this efforts. Let me start by jumping into a first round of questions, and maybe I start with the first on our scientific expert. You mentioned that geoengineering or solar geoengineering is not a plan B for a reduction of the gas house emissions. You also mentioned the cost factor, that it is relatively cheaper to invest in geoengineering than to reduce GHG. How strong do you assess the risk that at some point, even we don't know about all the implications, this might come up as a possible solution for an urgent situation that we face in the climate discussion?
Yeah, that's a definitely good point. That's maybe the one of the highest risks associated with this method. Maybe not really a scientific risk, but sort of the risk from the social side. I don't know. I mean, in the beginning, there were always discussions about this this type of a risk, but then some people did research and from the social science side on that, and even some people reacted actually differently. They reacted, hey, when they see and they get to know that people are starting to think more seriously about such crazy method to fight global warming, they start to actually be more engaged in trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I am definitely worried about the so-called moral hazard issue. Actually, from the people that study that topic, it's not that clear whether this is really the biggest risk or not. But I do see, I'd see here clearly potential for problems also if some actors would see some monetary benefit in doing this.
Thank you. And then with that, I would like to pose one question also to Mr. Tschirren. When you look at the global architecture, and from what I've understood, this topic needs to be encompassed in the global framework, in a global regulatory framework. If we fail to address it on whatever level, whatever form, what do you think is the biggest risk we face then if we don't succeed in framing the subject in the right way?
Thank you for that question. So, of course, I would say if you look at the landscape of actors that would have the institutional capacity to deploy such kind of SRM technologies, then that is very uneven, and you could reduce it to a few actors actually that would have the institutional capacity to deploy it on a large scale. However, the impact and potential very strong negative impact would be on many member states, on potential large part of civilization, on many ecosystems, would affect the lives and economies of people. And therefore, a global discussion is necessary. So if there are no resolutions in place that allow for information to be compiled and experts internationally to come together and discuss it, I think the risk is that at some stage there could be unilateral deployment, meaning some actors they could, from their analysis, be of the view that it's now necessary to deploy SRM technologies without the consent of other member states, and perhaps even without other member states knowing about it. And that would be the greatest risk. And I think small countries, perhaps also, such as Austria and Switzerland, we would be affected. without a global discussion taking place. So we believe global discussion is very important. Also considering that there are vulnerable countries, such as developing countries, or as I said, small countries that would also be affected by unilateral deployment.
Thank you. And my last question on the first round to Ambassador Meyer, to Salome. To address global risk mitigation is normally something that is deep enshrined in our profession. So what can diplomats do in exactly this discussion?
Well, thank you. I think I've mentioned it a little bit before. But as you say, I mean, as diplomats, we look out for the geopolitical effects. And I think we've heard a lot of possible geopolitical effects. I mean, the geo is in the politics and in the engineering here, so the links are very clear. What you mentioned, Dr. Gasparini, the issue of moral hazard, I think that is something that we as diplomats can very much, we have to be aware of, but then also we have to address it sort of as a systemic risk. And what I mean by that is it might influence the way we negotiate climate change. It might change the ways like-minded groups collaborate or not, or it might even go as far, even before the technology is deployed for that matter, could go as far as creating conflict between those countries who do want this technology deployed and used and those who don't want it to be deployed. So I think we as diplomats need to be aware of this new dynamic. And I think the other very important thing is sort of the systemic, apart from the systemic risk, is somewhat of a scenario risk, in the sense that at the end of the day, this technology, I'm not the expert at all on how it works, but I do at least see a potential for it to have a similar impact on geopolitical dynamics and therefore our work, as does strategic nuclear weapons. I mean, this technology can potentially be weaponized. On top of that, it's a technology contrary maybe to nuclear weapons that has a strong link to the private sector as well. So you have new dynamics of, let's say, state industrial complexes, which also need to be taken into account, I think, when we negotiate. And the only way we can get this started is through multilateral fora and to set the pace of what do we actually need, so the transparency, the information, which organizations should be in charge of, to simply start the conversation. And I think diplomacy is, at the end of the day, the platform where this can and will happen. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very multifaceted process that we have to enter, obviously. What does the floor think? Questions, Claudia?
Thank you. Yes, thanks to all the presenters for this great insight. I'm dealing mostly with tech diplomacy on AI and quantum, and some of the issues sound very familiar. And I wanted to pick up on what you said, Ambassador, in terms of diplomats' role and the fora and the way we frame and address it, because you mentioned there's not only the side on it for environmental experts, and Switzerland chose that particular platform where you would have environmental physicists and people who are engaged in the environmental diplomacy talks and experts been there for 20, 30 years. Mr. Tschirren mentioned it very slightly because you talk already about governance. We are talking about a technology that is not yet there, whose impact is totally unclear, and you're already starting into discussion on governance, and Ambassador Kornfeind even mentioned regulation. UNESCO came out with a report on the ethics of climate engineering. And I totally agree with you that we need a global, inclusive debate, because you mentioned that geopolitical risk about the North developing and possibly using it with a lot of impact on the global South. And they're not part of the way technology is directed. So maybe could it be a better start, if we talk about the ethics of it, get everybody on board in terms of how we as humanity want to steer that technology for common good. That's basically, the kind of technology participatory governance approach that is very much in place. And then once we have, some sort of a global consensus on where we want this to be going, risks and benefits, then maybe we come closer to a governance discussion, which will always be difficult because, as you said, there are, some geopolitical benefits to it, for military uses, for security reasons. And, some countries have a tendency, whenever there's a national security angle to it, not to want to, distribute the access to technology widely. So my question is, did Switzerland also look into maybe setting up a process within UNESCO where you have a different crowd of experts looking at this, more the ethicists of technology, and you also have biodiversity people, by the way, but a broader, more the social human science people who look into it from that angle. Sorry.
Thank you, and thank you also for the insight of the broader process of tech implications in the global framework. One question, Christoph von Hohenstein, and then I might look into the online forum.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. Thank you for the presentations on this super important and also dramatic topic. One comment and one question. The comment is just to make it clear how unilateral deployment could happen. King Stanley Robinson, one of the famous climate fiction writers, in the Ministry of the Future, the book starts really with this heat wave in India with 20 million people dead, and the government being forced to really start geoengineering, if my memory is correct, already, I think 3 years ago. But it gives you an example. And the second example is, of course, North Korea, able to tinker with whatever technologies. And I mean, you commented on it, but can one country, and I think North Korea could develop the capability of deploying this, really do it on a scale that's makes it a risk on a global scale, not only for, let's say, Asia or a smaller region in Asia, but really on a global scale. And the different question is, artificial intelligence was already mentioned. Can we imagine AI explosions in the sense that it really can help us to guide us on the way to deploy geoengineering methods?
UNESCO, artificial intelligence, with a fictional starting point. I think I would like to take one more question and then refer to the presentations. Elfie, More.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Thank you for the presenters, and good to have the possibility to be online here as well. I would have a comment and then a question to Michel. So during UNEA, when we discussed the resolution for Austria together with all the EU member states, it was very important that the principle of precaution, so the precautionary principle, would be clearly enshrined in the resolution and be part of the overall thinking regarding governance for solar radiation modification. But this, unfortunately, was not possible to achieve because there are many countries globally which did not want to see this somehow reflected. And this was also one of the reasons why, at the end, the resolution was not possible. Michel, does Switzerland, do you already have ideas or plans to continue the work and maybe try again in the next UNEA forum or in other forum, as we heard from Claudia? Thank you.
Then I would like to start with giving the floor to Mr. Tschirren for both questions from Claudia Reinwald and also from Elfie More, and then over to our expert presentation.
For the comments and the questions, it was not so easy for me to hear so well from the floor, but I will give it a try. Otherwise, please come back. So I would like to say, with regards to UNESCO and the different reports to be considered, that was actually the idea of the resolution, that in preparing the basis for discussion, so that input document, UNEP would work with different partners and to bring together into one document many aspects related to SRM technologies, including actually also ethical questions, of course, a range of political questions, of ecological questions from different disciplines, and so on. So there, it was quite actually the effort to bring together different expertise and different questions in order to have a solid basis. And then with regards to governance, yes, governance is further down the road. It really was the aim of the resolution to do the step before that is needed, and to leave it open whether governance is actually then needed or not. But certainly the compiling information, having access is needed. So the resolution focused on that part. With regards to precautionary principle, an important aspect, and it was difficult in the discussion because not all member states did have the same understanding as to how to include it and word it, and in which ways it would be understood. And therefore, that was also a sticking point, is true. With regards to going forward, yes, we are, as I said, of the view the topic will not go away, and it's not a good situation if states and stakeholders cannot be aware of what is going on. So it is important to further work on the topic, whether that is the upcoming UNEA or other fora, or both, that is still open. And we are also open to being approached and to discuss it, because, as I said, if there is interest to taking that further, certainly Switzerland is interested to contribute, having had this experience now also from UNEA 6. So that would be my responses. Back to you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much. And maybe starting from the apocalyptic scenario from Christoph Thun-Moschen, but also to realistic possibilities. What do you say, Dr. Gasparini?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned here North Korea. I'm a bit skeptical about a country of the size and economy of North Korea being able to do something like that, sincerely. But a country with a capacity like South Korea probably could technically. I mean, I guess that's not a rogue actor, so I guess I wouldn't unilaterally necessarily do it. Here, the main problem of just a country sort of doing it, to me, is that maybe you do it just like without having a good understanding of the bad consequences that could happen. Really, you can do it if you just do it, as I said, just on one hemisphere. For example, in the northern hemisphere, you can expect some problems with the climate, which would not happen if you do it in a more careful way, with some emissions which would reach both the northern and southern hemisphere, and uniform warming, which is technically probably not that difficult. I would then like to comment, there was a comment on the AI, whether that can help. Let's imagine we do it. I would put us in this situation now. Okay, we, for some reason, or some actor does it. How do we attribute potential, whatever, severe weather events to geoengineering or not? That's a huge problem. I'm not really sure how much we can do that from today's knowledge of climate science, but that's where I think AI may help in helping us really attribute some of the events to specifically geoengineering, and maybe some to still climate change. Here, I also want to bring in another sort of different but connected topic, and this is the topic of weather modification. So we should not forget that in this country, but also in many other countries, on very small scale, there's some sort of weather modification being done, concretely in Austria, trying to prevent hail from forming since 50 years and globally 70 years and more, and we still don't know whether this works or not. So that's where to connect with the attribution problem. But it's nevertheless being done, and it seems like people are not freaking out because of that. I would a bit freak out because as a scientist, I don't see a clear impact of that. But we could also think not just sort of from the global perspective, but maybe also look at this weather modification topic and see how that is treated both legally and how that is accepted by the society or not accepted by the society. And I also want to mention, Ministry for the Future is there, but there was also a book by an Austrian author that now I can't remember the name, but Celsius is another book. So if you're already in Austria, I guess I can mention also that book. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. We would have another maybe 5 minutes for questions. Actually, good. Sorry.
I just wanted to say that because I had time out to think, and I just think one thing I would like to say, apart from the fact that I think North Korea is technically more capable than we think, but the ethical question, because it really goes both ways, right? Is it ethical to deploy this technology with all the potential consequences, even when we have a good risk analysis of what those might be? Or is it ethical not to deploy it with all the climate, because I didn't know that, but apparently it is the quickest and most efficient method. So to start, and maybe that was the reason why within the negotiations on the resolution, there were those who said we also need to put in the positive elements of technology. But I think essentially that's really where we have to start. I'm normally an optimist, and every time somebody says that, they say something pessimistic. My fear at the moment is in a world where we can't even agree on the ethical power of the universality of human rights. It becomes very, very difficult to find an ethical sort of common ground here. But that's exactly, I think, why it is so important to start talking about it now. So thank you for making me think.
Thank you. Do we still have questions, please?
So my background is in economics, and I'm specifically looking at solar geoengineering and mitigation in theoretical climate agreements and how these two policies would interact. And some of the literature looks at, there's one paper that looks at counter geoengineering. And I was wondering if this is something that is actually in development. I'm not sure of the technical side of this is something that's being researched, but I think if we think about if we want to research solar geoengineering, we need a kind of backstop. So if we were to develop the technology, how do we stop other countries from, or how do we stop this deployment from occurring if we collectively agree that it shouldn't? And I think having something like a counter geoengineering would be a possible solution. Is there research on this, or is it just a theoretical model where it doesn't exist? Thank you.
Do we have others? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. I'm representing Austria at the OECD. I'm sorry. I'm representing Austria at the OECD. I think this is highly interesting because this is also going deep into security policy, security politics, future threats, and so on. And I think we will deal with that in the future as well. I have a question to the experts, and whether we could perhaps draw a bit a line to the benefits and threats of nuclear energy or of nuclear power. So you have geoengineering that can go wrong, but that can also do good things to potentially to fight, or perhaps not to mitigate climate change, but to adapt to some measures. Whether perhaps the future would be like in the nuclear field, where we have a kind of balance of deterrence. In what direction might that geoengineering go? Perhaps the same complicated field as with nuclear energy, but in the end, more or less, the world found its way how to deal with it.
Thank you. I would leave it at those two questions at the moment. I think, can we start with the expert, the counter engineering, and then the comparison to the nuclear technology? And if Mr. Tschirren wants to add, you're very welcome.
Yeah, I think there hasn't been many real studies except from that one on the counter geoengineering, but so I can't really say much more than that. But, yeah, that's probably a theoretical concept, and I can imagine that some of the countries are also interested. Okay, can we detect it if someone else does it? And yes, we can. I mean, if someone does it large scale, which is the only way to do it, that would have a substantial climate impact, we would detect. I think people are more interested about that. I would also just comment that probably it's not SRM and nuclear weapons. Probably that's going maybe too far, because with SRM you wouldn't destroy the world if you just do it today and press the button, while with nuclear probably you could. So just wanted to comment on that. But you could see also from my sort of background of the slides, dark colors. So I'm very aware of the risks. I think that was my implicit messaging there. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Tschirren, you would like to comment on those two questions as well?
Thank you. I just want to add an aspect with regards to potential deployment, unilateral deployment, reactions to that, because the risk that and the uncertainties are not just with regards to the deployment, which is why we need the discussion, but actually also with regards to stop applying technologies. Right? So it's not because some actors think potentially that it is urgent enough or they have enough information to deploy such technologies, that if it works, we're fine. But there are also potentially very large consequences if you abruptly stop applying such technologies. And sometimes this is an aspect that is not considered in this type of discussion, but would be very important, because stopping abruptly the application, deployment of such technologies could be because the actor wants to stop, or because he is not able to continuously ensure the deployment. And so again, that's a big part of the risk discussion to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Salome. Well, I think we had a very lively discussion. Well, thank you all of you for that. Also the Bundesministerium for Climate. I'm happy that you were able to join online. How to sum it up? I think it's to bridge the freaking out with the possibilities. The bridge between ethical questions and also a very scientific approach that is obviously not yet there. So we need a lot of more discussion on the subject, and more a better awareness of the potential implications it has on actual facts, but also on our global environmental approach. And last but not least, I would say the connect between the climate discussion that we're having and the geoengineering possibilities is a very imminent one. So I think 3 takeaways for us as diplomats, where we have to look into the matter, but also some takeaways how we can continue the discussion on that. And with having said that, I would like to thank especially our 2 guests online, Michel Tschirren from Switzerland, and also Dr. Gasparini for providing us with the necessary evidence on what we're talking about, and all of you for coming here today and joining our discussion. Thank you very much.